Sweat beaded on the back of Rebecca's neck, though it had nothing to do with the stifling Maryland heat. For 20 years, she had remained invisible by choice, a shadow in the world's most dangerous corners. But today, simply trying to watch her son graduate, her cover was about to be blown in the most spectacular way. The Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium in Annapolis was a sea of pristine white uniforms and blinding sunshine. It was graduation day for the United States Naval Academy, an event steeped in 2 centuries of tradition, pride, and an undeniable aura of American elitism. Families from across the nation filled the lower bowl, fanning themselves with glossy programs. Among them sat senators, tech billionaires, and multi-generational military dynasties, all reeking of old money, expensive cologne, and tailored linen. And then there was Rebecca. Rebecca Sterling sat in row 3 of VIP Section A, looking entirely out of place. She wore a simple, faded navy blue cotton dress she had bought off the rack at a J.C. Penney in Ohio 6 years ago. Her hair, prematurely streaked with silver, was pulled back into a severe, no-nonsense bun. She carried no designer handbag, just a battered leather satchel resting at her scuffed, sensible shoes. Her hands, if anyone bothered to look closely, told a story the rest of her outfit tried to hide. They were calloused, deeply scarred across the knuckles, and possessed a quiet, terrifying stillness. To the wealthy spectators whispering to her left and right, Rebecca was a glaring anomaly. She looked like a housekeeper who had somehow wandered into the wrong sector of the stadium. "Excuse me, do you think she's in the right place?" muttered Cynthia Davenport, a woman dripping in Tiffany pearls sitting 2 seats away, leaning over to whisper to her husband. "This section is reserved for dignitaries and family of the top percentile. She looks like she took a wrong turn at the bus station." Rebecca heard the whisper. She always heard everything. Her hearing was a finely tuned instrument, honed on the wind-swept ridges of the Hindu Kush and the crumbling concrete labyrinths of Fallujah. She ignored Cynthia, keeping her eyes fixed dead ahead on the massive stage constructed on the field. Somewhere in that sea of midshipmen was her son, Connor. Connor Sterling, graduating in the top 5% of his class, destined for the grueling pipeline of basic underwater demolition/SEAL training. Connor was her heart, her anchor to humanity, and the only reason she had ever tolerated the agonizing bureaucracy of the civilian world. She reached into her pocket and fingered the laminated VIP pass. It was a special issue pass, not generated by the Academy's Public Relations Office, but quietly couriered to her by a very high-ranking admiral at the Pentagon. It was a token of gratitude for a lifetime of classified service that officially did not exist. The security for the event was handled by a mix of Naval Academy personnel and a private, high-end contractor firm hired for crowd control among the VIPs. Pacing the aisle next to Rebecca's row were 2 men from the private firm. Officer Jenkins, a barrel-chested man whose uniform strained at the buttons, and Officer Caldwell, a younger, slicked-haired rent-a-cop with a chip on his shoulder the size of an aircraft carrier. Jenkins had been eyeing Rebecca for 20 minutes. In his mind, she didn't fit the profile. She wasn't wealthy, she wasn't recognizable, and her stoic, unmoving posture unsettled him. He nudged Caldwell. "Look at the woman in the faded dress," Jenkins muttered, tapping his radio. "Row 3, seat 12. She's been sitting there like a statue. Doesn't match the demographic for Section A. Probably snuck in while the ushers were dealing with the senator's entourage." Caldwell sneered, adjusting his duty belt. "I'll handle it. Hate it when these people try to steal seats from the folks who actually belong here." Rebecca felt their approach before she saw them, the heavy, clumsy footfalls on the aluminum bleachers, the slight shift in the air current, the sudden hush of the judgmental elite around her, eagerly anticipating a confrontation. "Ma'am." Caldwell's voice was loud, intentionally projecting over the pre-ceremony band music, so the surrounding rows could hear. "I'm going to need to see your ticket." Rebecca didn't flinch. She slowly turned her head, her pale blue eyes locking on to Caldwell. For a fraction of a second, Caldwell felt an icy spike of pure, primal fear shoot down his spine, though he couldn't understand why. He was looking at a middle-aged, plainly dressed woman, yet his instincts screamed at him that he had just kicked a sleeping tiger. "My ticket is in order," Rebecca said. Her voice was soft, devoid of any inflection or tremble. It was a voice used to delivering bad news over encrypted comms. "I still need to see it, Ma'am," Jenkins interjected, stepping up beside his partner, trying to physically loom over her. "This section is restricted. We have families of highly decorated officers and state officials here. We can't have people sneaking down from the upper tiers." Rebecca slowly reached into her pocket and withdrew the laminated pass, handing it to Jenkins. Jenkins scrutinized it. It didn't look like the standard glossy tickets the others held. There were no barcodes, just a holographic seal of the Department of Defense and a stamped signature that Jenkins didn't recognize. To his untrained eye, it looked like a crude forgery. "Where did you get this?" Jenkins asked, his tone turning accusatory. "It was issued to me," Rebecca replied evenly. "I am here for my son." "Right. And I'm the Secretary of the Navy," Caldwell scoffed. "Look, lady, this is a fake, a bad one. We've had a problem with counterfeits all morning. I don't know who you're trying to impress, but you're in a seat reserved for a top-tier VIP. I suggest you run that pass through your supervisor before you make a mistake you cannot rectify," Rebecca advised, her tone dropping half an octave. It wasn't a threat. It was a tactical warning. Cynthia Davenport gasped softly from 2 seats over. The absolute nerve. They should just remove her. Jenkins flushed red, embarrassed by the audience. He wasn't about to be told how to do his job by a frumpy woman in a cheap dress. "I don't need a supervisor to tell me a fake when I see one. You need to gather your things and vacate this seat immediately, ma'am. You're trespassing in a restricted zone." The band struck up a louder, triumphant march. Out on the field, the first columns of graduating midshipmen began to march toward their seats. Rebecca's heart rate remained a steady, meditative 55 beats per minute. A sniper's pulse. She had lain motionless in Iraqi rubble for 72 hours straight, breathing through the stench of decay to take a single, world-altering shot. 2 overzealous security guards were not going to make her lose her composure, but they were blocking her view of Connor. "I am not leaving," Rebecca stated, turning her gaze back toward the field. "My son is Midshipman Connor Sterling. He is marching in right now. You are obstructing my view. Step aside." "Okay, that's it," Caldwell snapped, losing his temper. "We tried to do this the nice way, lady. Now you're coming with us." He reached out and grabbed Rebecca's left shoulder. It was a fatal miscalculation. Caldwell didn't know that the woman he just touched was known in classified circles as Wraith. He didn't know she was the only female attached to a Tier 1 Naval Special Warfare Development Group, a long-range ballistic specialist who had more confirmed eliminations than any man in her unit. When Caldwell's hand clamped onto her shoulder, 20 years of ingrained, lethal muscle memory surged through Rebecca's nervous system. Before the guard could even blink, Rebecca's right hand shot up, her fingers digging precisely into the bundle of nerves just above Caldwell's elbow. She applied exactly 4 pounds of pressure, not enough to break the arm, but enough to send a paralyzing, agonizing shockwave straight up to his neck. Caldwell gasped, his knees buckling instantly as his arm went entirely numb. He dropped his grip on her. stumbling backward into Jenkins, his face pale with sudden shock. "Do not touch me," Rebecca whispered. The softness of her voice made the command infinitely more terrifying. "Assault!" Jenkins yelled, panic flashing in his eyes as he caught his partner. He reached for the heavy radio on his belt. "Control, this is Jenkins at Section A, Row 3. We have an aggressive trespasser. Female, refusing to comply, just assaulted Officer Caldwell. We need backup now. I want her removed from the stadium." The commotion had now drawn the attention of an entire block of VIP seating. People were standing up, craning their necks. Murmurs of outrage rippled through the elite crowd. "They need to call the real military police," a man in a tailored suit sneered. "These rent-a-cops can't handle a crazed woman." Rebecca sat perfectly still, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She felt a brief pang of sorrow, not for herself, but for Connor. She had promised herself she wouldn't ruin his day. She had promised she would remain invisible. But the world, it seemed, rarely let the invisible remain at peace. 2 more security guards came jogging down the stadium steps, their faces flushed, hands resting intimidatingly on their tactical belts. "What's the situation?" the senior guard barked, glaring down at Rebecca. "She's got a fake pass, refused to leave, and just attacked Caldwell." Jenkins pointed a trembling finger at her. "Grab her under the arms. We're hauling her out, and she's getting handed over to the Annapolis PD." The 4 men formed a semicircle around Rebecca. The grandstands grew eerily quiet, the immediate spectators holding their breath, waiting for the physical removal of the peasant who dared to sit among the kings. "Ma'am, stand up, now," the senior guard ordered, pulling out a set of heavy zip ties. Rebecca closed her eyes, taking a slow, deep breath. She calculated the distance to the exits, the physical weight of the 4 men, and the precise strikes needed to disable them in under 6 seconds. It would be a massacre. It would make national news. It would humiliate Connor. She opened her eyes, preparing to simply stand and walk away to save her son the embarrassment, when a shadow fell over the aisle. The temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop 10 degrees. The aggressive, bullying posturing of the security guards abruptly halted. Jenkins blinked, looking past Rebecca, his jaw suddenly going slack. A heavy, absolute silence rolled down the bleachers. Cynthia Davenport's pearls clattered against her chest as she gasped, her eyes wide with shock. Stepping out from the shadowed concrete tunnel of the stadium concourse, moving in perfect, terrifying synchronization, were 6 men in pristine navy dress blues. They did not walk, they stalked. They moved with the silent, predatory grace of apex predators. Their chests were armor-plated with rows of colorful ribbons, but it was the gleaming golden insignia pinned above their left breast pockets that sucked the air out of the section. The special warfare insignia, the seal trident. These weren't administrative officers or academy instructors. These were seasoned operators, their faces weathered by desert suns and ocean spray, their eyes constantly scanning, assessing, dominating the space. At the front of the diamond formation was Commander Thomas Hayes. He was a mountain of a man, his face a map of pale scars, his jaw set like granite. Flanking him were Master Chief David Miller and Senior Chief Gregory Hutchinson. The 4 private security guards froze, suddenly looking very small, very soft, and entirely out of their depth. Commander Hayes stopped at the edge of row 3. He didn't look at Jenkins. He didn't look at the trembling Caldwell. He looked straight past them, his hardened eyes finding the woman in the faded floral dress. A slow, profound warmth flooded the commander's eyes. "Guards," Commander Hayes said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a gravelly, unmistakable authority that made the aluminum bleachers vibrate. "Step away from the chief." Jenkins swallowed hard, trying to maintain his authority in front of the wealthy onlookers. "Commander, with all due respect, this woman is trespassing. She has a counterfeit VIP pass, and she just assaulted my partner. We are removing her." Master Chief Miller let out a low, dark chuckle that sounded like grinding stones. He took half a step forward, invading Jenkins' personal space so entirely that the guard instinctively flinched. "Oh, son," Miller whispered, his eyes boring holes into Jenkins's skull. "If she had actually assaulted him, your partner wouldn't be standing right now. He'd be drinking his meals through a straw." Commander Hayes stepped between the guards, parting them effortlessly, and stopped right in front of Rebecca. To the absolute shock of the murmuring billionaires and the paralyzed security team, the 6 massive decorated seals snapped to razor-sharp attention. Their right hands sliced through the air, stopping perfectly at the brims of their white covers in a crisp, flawless salute. "Chief Sterling," Commander Hayes announced, his voice carrying the weight of unparalleled respect. "It is an honor to find you here, ma'am. We've been looking all over the stadium for you." The collective gasp from VIP Section A was audible even over the resounding brass of the Navy Band playing on the field below. The wealthy, the elite, and the heavily decorated spectators stared in absolute, unblinking disbelief. For 3 long, agonizing seconds, the 6 SEALs held their salute, their hands rigid, their eyes locked on the woman in the faded cotton dress. Rebecca looked at Commander Hayes, a ghost of a smile finally softening the hard lines of her face. She didn't stand. She simply offered a single, precise nod. "At ease, Commander," Rebecca said quietly. Instantly, the 6 men dropped their hands, adopting a relaxed but intensely vigilant posture. Jenkins, the senior security guard, looked like he had just swallowed a golf ball. His face flushed from crimson to a sickly, pale white. He looked at Commander Hayes, then down at the laminated pass he still held in his trembling hand. "Commander, I don't understand," Jenkins stammered, his voice cracking. "This pass, it doesn't have the stadium barcodes. The system—" Commander Hayes stepped closer to Jenkins, his massive frame completely eclipsing the sun. He reached out and smoothly plucked the laminated pass from the guard's fingers. "That is because this pass wasn't printed by a stadium ticketing office, Officer Jenkins," Hayes said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. He held the card up so Jenkins, Caldwell, and the eavesdropping Cynthia Davenport could see it clearly. "This is a Department of Defense Tier 1 Alpha Clearance Pass. It is personally signed by the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. It means this woman can walk into the Pentagon, the White House Situation Room, or any classified installation on this planet without answering to a soul. And it certainly means she can sit in a bleacher seat to watch her son graduate." Caldwell, who was still clutching his throbbing, numb arm, took a stumbling step backward, the terrifying realization of who or what he had just tried to physically assault crashed over him like a tidal wave. We didn't know," Caldwell whispered, his bravado entirely evaporated. "She didn't say who she was." Master Chief Miller scoffed, adjusting his pristine white cover. "Quiet professionals rarely do, son. That's why they are who they are. Now, unless you want me to make a phone call to your employer and explain why you attempted to manhandle a decorated naval hero, I suggest you clear the aisle." The 4 security guards didn't need to be told twice. They practically tripped over themselves, scrambling up the concrete steps, disappearing into the stadium concourse, leaving a profound, vibrating silence in their wake. In the seats nearby, the attitude of the elite crowd underwent a violent shift. Cynthia Davenport, who had previously looked at Rebecca as if she were a carrier of the plague, now sank low into her seat, her face burning with profound humiliation. Her husband, Richard, a man who usually commanded boardrooms, offered Rebecca a stunned, apologetic bow of his head. "Chief," Commander Hayes said, turning his attention entirely back to Rebecca. His tone softened, carrying a deep, familial affection. "We heard you were coming out of the shadows for Connor's big day. We couldn't let you sit here alone." "I am perfectly capable of sitting quietly, Thomas," Rebecca replied, though her eyes betrayed a deep gratitude. "You men should be in Coronado. You have a deployment cycle coming up." "With respect, Ma'am, Coronado can wait," Senior Chief Hutchinson chimed in, flashing a bright, reckless grin. "Besides, we had to make sure the boy looks sharp. You know how these academy kids get." Without waiting for permission, the 6 SEALs seamlessly integrated themselves into the space around Rebecca. Commander Hayes and Master Chief Miller sat in the 2 empty seats directly behind her, their broad shoulders forming a literal wall of navy blue. The other 4 operators flanked the edges of her row, standing at parade rest, their eyes constantly scanning the crowd. They had transformed VIP Section A from a gathering of wealthy spectators into a heavily fortified command post. Down on the field, the ceremony had officially begun. The roar of a quartet of F/A 18 Super Hornets shattered the sky in a flawless diamond formation, signifying the arrival of the graduating class. The midshipmen marched in precise, undulating columns of pristine white, taking their seats on the sprawling green turf. Rebecca leaned forward, her eyes scanning the thousands of identical white uniforms with the terrifying, practiced efficiency of a sniper sweeping a valley. It took her exactly 4 seconds to find him. Row 42, seat 8. Connor Sterling sat tall, his shoulders squared, his face a mask of determined pride. As the speeches droned on, Connor casually allowed his eyes to drift up toward the VIP section, looking for the familiar, understated figure of his mother. He knew she would be there, quiet, unassuming, probably wearing that faded dress she loved so much. When his eyes finally found Section A, Row 3, Connor froze. He saw his mother, but she wasn't alone. Surrounding her, standing like legendary guardians, were 6 men wearing the coveted gold trident. Connor's breath hitched. As a midshipman heading into the SEAL pipeline, those men were gods to him. They were the very apex of the mountain he was about to climb, and they were standing guard over his mother. Connor saw the towering commander lean down and whisper something into Rebecca's ear, making her smile. A profound, earth-shattering confusion gripped him. His mother was an intelligence analyst. That was the story she had told him his entire life. She pushed papers. She analyzed satellite photos. She worked behind a desk in a windowless room. But as Connor looked at the deep respect radiating from the most lethal men on Earth toward the woman who raised him, the carefully constructed illusion of his childhood began to crack. The deafening roar of 1,000 white hats being hurled into the bright Maryland sky signaled the end of the ceremony. The rigid discipline of the academy instantly dissolved into a chaotic, joyous sea of cheering, weeping families, flooding the field and the lower concourses. Connor didn't wait for his classmates. He grabbed his cover, tucked it under his arm, and sprinted toward the lower retaining wall of Section A. He pushed past weeping mothers, shouting fathers, and backslapping generals, his eyes locked on the small, silver-haired woman descending the bleacher stairs. She was flanked by the 6 SEALs, who parted the dense crowd for her, like an icebreaker moving through a frozen sea. "Mom!" Connor shouted, his voice cracking with emotion as he cleared the final barrier. Rebecca stopped. The stoic, unmoving mask she had worn for the guards and the VIPs instantly shattered. In its place was just a mother looking at her boy. She stepped forward, throwing her arms around Connor's broad shoulders, burying her face in the crisp white fabric of his uniform. "I am so incredibly proud of you, Connor," she whispered fiercely into his ear. "So proud." Connor hugged her back tightly, closing his eyes, letting the reality of the moment wash over him. But as he pulled back, his gaze shifted immediately to the 6 massive men standing in a loose semicircle behind her. Commander Hayes stepped forward, extending a hand the size of a catcher's mitt. "Midshipman Sterling," Hayes rumbled, his grip firm and testing. "Congratulations. I'm Commander Thomas Hayes. This is Master Chief Miller, Senior Chief Hutchinson, and the rest of Echo Platoon." Connor shook the commander's hand, his eyes wide, his mind racing. "Sir, it's an honor, sir. But I don't understand. How do you know my mother?" Hayes looked at Rebecca. Rebecca offered a small, hesitant sigh, giving the commander a virtually imperceptible nod. It was time. The boy was entering their world now. He needed to know the truth. "Your mother," Hayes began, his voice taking on a solemn, reverent tone, "told you she was an analyst, didn't she?" Connor nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. Logistics and satellite reconnaissance." A dark, knowing chuckle rippled through the SEALs. Master Chief Miller shook his head. "She was reconnaissance, all right. Just a lot closer to the ground than a satellite." Hayes took a step closer to Connor, looking the young man dead in the eye. 7 years ago, midshipman, Echo Platoon was compromised during a highly classified extraction in the Korengal Valley. We were pinned down in a rocky gorge by 60 heavily armed insurgents. We were out of water, running black on ammo, and we had 2 men critically wounded. The air support couldn't fly in because of a massive dust storm. Connor listened, spellbound, the noise of the celebrating stadium fading away into total silence. "We prepared to make our last stand," Hayes continued, his eyes darkening with the memory. "And then suddenly, the enemy's heavy machine gunner just dropped. Then their mortar team leader. Over the next 14 hours, through a blinding sandstorm, from a ridge 1,200 yards away, an invisible guardian angel systematically dismantled the enemy forces. 32 confirmed consecutive impacts. She broke their siege single-handedly and covered our exfiltration to the extraction zone." Connor's jaw slowly dropped. He turned his head, staring at his mother. He looked at her calloused hands, the scars across her knuckles, the permanent, calculating stillness in her pale blue eyes. "We never saw her," Hayes said softly. "We only knew her by her call sign on the radio. Wraith. We didn't know her real name, or that she was the only female Tier 1 long-range ballistic asset in the Navy until she retired 2 years ago. We owe her our lives, Connor. Every man standing here today gets to go home to their families because your mother held the line." Connor's eyes filled with hot, stinging tears. All those missed birthdays, the sudden, unexplained trips, the times she came home smelling of cordite and exhaustion, locking herself in her room for days. It hadn't been an office job. She had been standing in the breach, carrying the heaviest burdens the nation could ask of a human being. "Mum," Connor choked out, utterly overwhelmed. Rebecca reached up and gently placed a scarred hand on her son's cheek. "You are embarking on a very difficult path, Connor. I didn't want the weight of my shadow to fall on you. I wanted you to earn your trident as Connor Sterling, not as Wraith's son." "You could never cast a shadow, Mum," Connor whispered, pulling her into another embrace. "Only a light, a blinding light." A few yards away, hovering awkwardly at the edge of the concourse, stood Officer Jenkins and Caldwell. They had been sent down by stadium management to formally apologize, having realized the catastrophic magnitude of their mistake. They approached hesitantly, looking like condemned men approaching the gallows. Chief Sterling. Ma'am, Jenkins stammered, removing his hat. The management, we are so profoundly sorry for our conduct earlier. We had no idea. Rebecca turned slightly, keeping one arm wrapped around her son's waist. She looked at the two terrified guards, then passed them to Cynthia Davenport, who was power-walking toward the exits, eager to escape the proximity of actual consequence. Officer Jenkins, Rebecca said, her voice completely devoid of malice, yet carrying an undeniable, razor-sharp edge. The next time you see someone sitting quietly, who doesn't wear the right clothes, or look like they belong in your restricted circles, remember today. Do not mistake humility for weakness, and do not ever mistake silence for a lack of power. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely, ma'am. Jenkins nodded frantically, practically bowing before retreating rapidly into the crowd. Commander Hayes clapped Connor firmly on the shoulder. All right, Ensign. You've got your butter bars, and you've got Bud/S training waiting for you in California. But today, Echo Platoon is buying the Sterling family the biggest steak dinner in Annapolis, and nobody argues with the chief. Rebecca smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that made her look 20 years younger. She linked her arm through her son's, turning her back on the empty VIP section, the judgmental stares, and the superficial world she had spent a lifetime defending. Surrounded by giants, walking alongside her legacy, the invisible sniper finally stepped out into the sun. True power rarely announces itself with loud clothes or arrogant demands. It sits quietly in the shadows, bearing the scars of sacrifice. Rebecca Sterling proved that a mother's love and a warrior's spirit are cut from the exact same cloth, reminding us all that the most extraordinary heroes often look just like ordinary people.